Chicago. And this was sort of the rollout. This is the last of the rollout. Wait until November it starts to run over again. Yeah. And then this area is which would be a mixture of blue zone and warm zone. So you can get a badge to get into the blue zone. It's like a aquarium, a fish tank.
It's the citadel, or you have the first part, and then you have the fortress in the middle. So.
No, I heard some. They were discussing how to differentiate the access. Yeah. And that might affect. Well, especially the business community. Transparent, inclusive.
That's it. You can be open, transparent, and
on the almost blue zone. So, well, I think the message will be more relaxed. So when basically there would be it's a pity that they drag these places spread them out. It's been common yet. That's right, yes. Except maybe for Marrakesh. Marrakesh was that thing with my one mission was a nice tap. Right. Right. So the minister in that's protected.
oh, shit.
Potential as well. Let's remind you of things Australia. We just well, I mean, we still got help.
Good.
So, you want to just, we'll just have a quick chat, just first 50 seconds. So the way we suggest we do it is to use this chair for speaking. They suggest you do that as an operator. Then the panelists is there, so those will be bars of the response. So when at the beginning, if you want to see stuff, we suggest you sit front. Then when we call you, you come to this your bit, and then move to that way.
We don't have to use it for sure, right? We'll use the valves for slides.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sure. Very nice to meet you.
What's that?
Yeah, great powers.
I say, he works with so kind people.
Yeah, let me grab my notes here. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for everybody coming today. We've got an exciting program for you. My name is Dave Turk. I'm the head of the Energy Environment Division at the IEA, the International Energy Agency. And you're here for a launch of one of what I think is one of our most interesting, exciting, and hopefully useful publications for this particular audience, the Tracking Clean Energy Progress Report. Before turning it over to my colleague, Jean-François, who's the head of the technology team where much of this work is done on the Tracking Clean Energy Progress report, let me just say a few things about who the IEA is. I suspect it may be quite familiar with many folks in the room, but it might not be as familiar with some in the room. We'll then turn to Jean-François with the actual launch of the publication, certainly showing some highlights and some broader context. And then we'll move to a panel discussion with a few colleagues and certainly plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So as you see on the screen above me here, the International Energy Agency is really focused on three parts. One is data. You're going to track anything you need to know where the data is. What is the data saying about where we are currently? The IEA is an all-of-energy organization, meaning that we track all parts of the energy spectrum, from efficiency to renewables to coal to oil and gas, and all the interlinkages in between. And I think it's fair to say when you look for authoritative data, certainly on the energy systems, we also put out GHG emission data on a yearly basis as well. The IEA is one of the most, if not the most respected data collection and data sources in the world. Secondly, you see focus there on analysis. So you've got this great data. What do you do with it? Well, you analyze that data, you run scenarios, you do modeling to see what that data tells you, not only about today, but where the world is likely headed, where regions and countries are likely headed, but also where they could be headed with some existing or different policy choices, different investments in research and development. So we do a number of scenarios. We do the World Energy Outlook and the Energy Technology Perspectives work. Jean-François heads up the Energy Technology Perspectives, the ETP modeling team, doing all sorts of scenarios. And JF can talk about some of that work further, both in his presentations, but also in question and answer sessions. And then the third piece, of course, is you build off the data as the foundation. You go to the analysis piece and modeling and scenarios, and then the solutions piece. What are the real world solutions out there that policymakers, that companies, that other important stakeholders in the world can take and apply in their particular circumstances, and really underline that real world part. The IEA is very much about trying to provide ideas and solutions and policies that will actually work in the real world, that can be very ambitious and aggressive, certainly to meet the Paris objective, which is a very ambitious objective, but also ones that will work to achieve other policy objectives, whether they be air pollution, security, economic development, economic prosperity as well. So just a few other words about the IEA. It's about a 40-year plus organization. We have about 270 people, all based in Paris. It is all of energy focus to it. The other thing that's going on right now is a modernization effort in the IEA. And so we're looking to expand partnerships, in particular with key countries like China and India and Indonesia. We've got what's called now association partnerships. So the IEA is really becoming a global, truly global energy agency. At the same time, we've got a mandate from our ministers and our leadership to become a clean energy hub for the world. And so we've got a new energy efficiency division. We've got a unit on systems integration. We're now the host of the Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat. So all sorts of ways where we're trying to build up our capabilities in the clean energy space. So with that, let me turn it over to Jean-François so he can launch the Tracking Clean Energy Progress Report for this year, the 2017 version, and run through that. We'll then pause for any questions from the audience if there are any immediate questions, and then we'll turn to our two panelists and certainly have plenty of opportunity for more questions after that. Jean-François.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thanks for that great introduction and that good scene setter of why it is the IEA is here. I think what I want to do in terms of setting up the presentation is give you a little bit of overview of how that report fits into the overall philosophy of why it is important for the IEA to be here in Bonn, to be able to discuss with climate negotiators and many, many stakeholders. Because what we think and what we want people to understand is that, in terms of our views of how this fits with our own day-to-day activities, what we're trying to say is the energy sector is key to sustainable development, and you cannot hope to achieve a sustainable transition, a climate negotiation, without understanding how the energy sector can contribute to achieving that goal. At the same time, you need to realize that the energy sector also has its own set of challenges. So it's important we are here because energy is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions today, which is about 2/3 of the total. But energy is also the largest source of air pollution. So we are trying to match how you can continue relying on energy to grow your economies while meeting environmental sustainabilities. Yet, there are still billions who remain without access to modern energy services. And so it's matching these different aspects. It's understanding how the energy sector can evolve into a truly affordable, secure, and sustainable source of economic development that we're trying to balance. And that's the message we're trying to bring forward. Trying to bring forward that the energy sector is already changing. When you look at the way we've been growing our economy over the past few years, we've been more and more efficient in terms of how much added value we're producing for every unit of energy. So we're really improving the efficiency at which we're growing these economies. We're also getting much better in terms of providing affordable sources. Renewables are now becoming cost competitive, and they're basically driving the increase in capacity worldwide. And so really the low carbon technologies have gone to a place where they're actually now competing against traditional energy sources on a nose-to-nose basis. For example, one of the key drivers of energy access over the past decades, coal, is now, after a decade of strong growth, actually stalling, and we're starting to see emerging economies looking at renewables as the main engine for their continued growth. So one of the messages we're trying to say is there is no single story about how the global energy system will go, and it's important that policymakers understand the drivers, understand that the impediments of a sustainable energy transition so that we can have the right mechanisms in place to be able to understand the fact that we're in an area where technology is progressing very fast, where business models are changing quite drastically, where sustainability is starting to become a modus operandi for all stakeholders, and be able to have the right policy drivers to build on that momentum. Dave was talking about data, the importance of understanding data. So this is the first graph. This is an IEA presentation, lots of graphs, lots of numbers. One of the main things we've been saying over the past few years is when we look at how the energy emissions are growing, for the first time, well, not for the first time, for the third consecutive time, we've actually had a leveling off of energy-related CO2 emissions in a growing economy. This is the first time in history that's happened. We've actually had 3 times before where there was a leveling off of CO2 emissions, but they were associated with economic downturns. Now, for the recent past, we've actually been able to continue growing our economy without growing emissions. But that is one data set. About, is that a long-term trend? Well, that's where being able to, as Dave mentioned, looking at a series of indicators, looking at a series of different understandings of the energy sector, we can try to understand what was the impact of the pledges that were taken in Paris 2 years ago. Is that actually changing the trend? Are we going to plateau and then start going down as we would like to? When we do this analysis, what we find is we have made progress in Paris. We have changed the trends, but we're still not quite there yet. We still see emissions growing, albeit at a slower pace, but we're as far from the goal that we set ourselves a very long time ago to halve our emissions by the middle of the century. So what we've been doing for those past 10 years is looking at how the energy sector could try to take that gap and fill it with new ways of moving the energy system forward. And a lot of what we do is to try to understand how the different technology levers, how the different policy levers can be best matched, best integrated to be able to achieve a low carbon transition without dropping the affordability and energy security questions associated with a sustainable energy transition. So we've been doing a lot of that thinking in terms of the systems integration and how these different things need to work together. We got an even bigger request. We actually were asked to say, how can we actually move to well below 2 degrees? And so what we're currently doing is doing the analysis of what are the remaining levers that we can use. We will be releasing in 2 weeks from now the Clean Energy Ministerial, the 2017 edition of Energy Technology Perspectives that does a deep dive in terms of how far you can push these energy technologies, how much you can gain extra. This graph is just one excerpt of that thinking. What you can see from this graph is that all the low-hanging fruit is already gone. If you look at the end period of that graph, you realize that the power sector is actually already fully decarbonized by 2060. And the bulk of the remaining emissions are actually in industry and transport, very difficult to achieve, to reduce aspects. So we know that we have a big challenge about us. We know we've gained some insight. What we're trying to bring to the discussion is a lot more details in terms of how those changes have been happening, what are the barriers to bring them a lot forward, and this is where the report we're releasing today becomes very important, going into the details of where is the energy system today, how good have we been faring. First, good news from that from that report. We are still continually exceeding our own projections in terms of the role that solar PV and wind can play in an energy system. Technology keeps exceeding our expectations. Policies keep delivering on the opportunity, and so we do believe that we are quite on track to meet our targets in terms of solar PV and wind with respect to our 2 degrees scenario. Now, the downside to that story is solar PV and wind are the only 2 renewables technologies that are actually making that type of project. When we look at renewable power as a whole, we see that there has been some growth over the past few decades. And when we try to extrapolate the policies that are being put in place and the recent trends, we do see that there is still progression for the next 5 years. However, we're not on the right track to meet the full range of opportunities that these different technologies can bring. When we look at the share of total power that gets produced by renewables, we also see some progress, but that is quite below the optimum. And so what we're doing is we're putting out a lot of effort on specific technologies, but we're losing the rest of the pack. And this is a risk because solar PV and wind are variable technologies, and we are not putting forward the other low carbon technologies that have the flexibility to integrate those into play. Again, the message is you have to stop thinking about silos and see how things fit together. For example, supply side is one thing, demand is another. And in that respect, we also see a pretty good story. Our electric vehicles is actually still keeping the progress. So on the transport electrification side, we've seen year-on-year increase in the role of electromobility. We see now OEMs with a lot more offering. We see plans for the big companies to actually electrify. So we're seeing very, very good signs on there. However, there's also a downside to this. at this point in time, electric vehicles still rely a whole lot on the right policies to be able to compete head-to-head with internal combustion engines. And we're seeing the interest in supporting that to start to wane. And what this does is when we look at the rate at which these sales have been growing, and so we're starting to lose the momentum that we've had over the past few years, and it's very important that we keep that high-level policy support there, at least until we have a competitive technology that can actually bring forward. Good news is OEMs are seeing that cost parity within the next decade, so we have reasons to be engaged, but we shouldn't drop the support at the moment where we're about to succeed. Now, I talked about supply, I talked about demand. Key aspect is how do you fit the two together? How do you look at the systems integrations approach? And on there, we also see some good news. Energy storage is finally starting to see its niche. We're finally starting to put the right policies into place that actually you can look at storage assets as a cost-effective solution in a power system. If we look at the amount of storage that was available about 5 years ago, and we look at how that changed 3 years afterward, we had almost a doubling of the amount of storage in the system just over 3 years. Next 2 years exceeded that doubling. So we see on average more than 50% growth in energy storage, and we see a lot more policies now that recognize the multiple values that storage technologies bring to the energy system, and therefore we really believe that the systems integrations aspects are starting to make it through. But again, storage right now is a minute part of the total power systems investment. We also need to look at other flexibility mechanisms, like extended markets, like demand response aspects. And so we're making progress on some parts, but we're sadly not filling the full potential. An example of some technologies that are absolutely necessary and are actually not making progress is CCS. Now, over the past few decades, we've seen quite interesting things happening in terms of the number of new projects coming online, demonstrations in a variety of systems demonstrating that CCS is not only a power technology, it's also a technology for the industrial site, iron and steel, cement, fuel transformation. So we're starting to see that these CCS projects can work in different places. But if we look at the next couple of years, we actually see that the projects in the pipeline are drying up. So we've seen new projects coming online, but we don't see new projects getting approval to go forward in the future. And when you look at the opportunity with CCS, so when you take this number that looks like a very interesting growth and you put that into relativeness to the opportunity that lies to be able to reduce our carbon footprint, we're really, really missing a whole opportunity here. And this is truly a policy signal that is being needed. CCS is not an energy technology per se. It's not a technology that produces energy. It is a climate technology. It needs to be recognized in forums like this as an essential part of a low carbon transition. So this also demonstrates the important role that governments have to play. CCS is an early stage technology. We need more demonstrations, and we actually need more support for the early stage technology points in many aspects. We've been tracking over the past few years the amount of government support that goes into early stage research, development, and demonstration projects. And basically what we found is after a drop in interest in supporting clean energy research and development, we've seen numbers go back up again, which was a good news. We've also seen the areas that got supported getting much closer to clean energy focuses, so that's a very good news. In Paris, there was a hugely important announcement made about mission innovation, which seeks to double the amount of R&D money being put forward by governments baseline, and so we're hopeful that this uptrend will continue through the success of mission innovation. But the bad news that we've seen over the past few places, while the total amount has gone up, the actual share of total R&D budgets that go to the energy sector has gone down. And so it seems that the importance of the energy sector in terms of R&D is not commensurate to the importance of the energy sector in terms of the role it has to play for a sustainable energy transition. So that's why we're very happy to see mission innovation helping raise that bar, but we do believe that this needs to be much more part of an everyday discussion in terms of how you support low carbon transition. So these are a few highlights of some of the analysis that we've done. We don't have 2 hours, so I won't go through all the details, but I will definitely invite you to go to our website, where we've launched this year a new tool to allow all stakeholders to get a better understanding of the work that we're doing. We now have a live visualization exercise on the website where we have, as a beginning screen, a snapshot of all the technologies and how they stand. So you can see right from there that we're doing good on a few items. We're making some progress in a lot of technologies, but nearly not as fast as we should to be able to make their full potential. And we're really way behind in certain areas. And so what you can do from that is actually start looking at each of these. So if I click here on electric vehicles, you'll see some overarching view of where the system is going and what are some of the key findings and things that can be done. And if you actually go to the website, lost my... if you actually click on it, then you go to a specific page that has a lot more details in terms of what can be, what the overall status is, what are some related technologies for in transport sector and so forth. Then you have a lot more details on what were the recent trends, why is our assessment that this technology is green, orange, or red, actual progress numbers if you want to look at the data, what are some of the things that are working well, what are some of the things that are not, recommended actions, what can we do about this status, and then a few of the graphs and the information that relate to this. So we really hope that this information that we're putting out today, this is freely accessible online for everyone. It is not only for energy experts, it's for all those that are interested in understanding how the energy sector is progressing in terms of supporting a low carbon economy transition. And we'll be very, very keen for you to actually access that information. And what would be interested, I think, in the next few minutes is also to discuss whether what I've just presented, the type of information we're presenting, is useful, you think, in a setting like the climate discussion. What could be other information that could be useful? How the IEA can really help demonstrate the value that the data we have, the analysis that we have, in terms of an understanding of the energy sector's role in the low carbon transition. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Dave.
No, thanks, Jean-François. And before opening it up for any initial sets of questions for Jean-François or myself, let me just take a few minutes to speak about going forward. So why are we here? Why are we launching this Tracking Clean Energy Progress effort for the first time ever here in Bonn, here in the UNFCCC context? I think put simply, it's because of the success you all have had, the success of the Paris Agreement, the fact that we're now in a real world implementation phase. Countries have goals on the table. We've got long-term collective goals. The real ballgame now is how can we implement those targets? How can we ramp up ambition even further? And so that's why we thought this particular kind of analysis, tracking different technologies, are we green? Are we on track collectively? Are we orange, making some progress, but not enough to be on a 2-degree trajectory, let alone a well below 2-degree trajectory? Or are we red? Are there some real warning signs that despite all the political ambition generated by your discussions, the real world trends are just not going in a positive way? So that's why we've broken it down just as green, orange, red context. That's why we've got a new interactive website for the first time, so anybody can hopefully easily access both the top line information, but also drill down on the actual underlying data with some rigor associated with it. So I have a few more slides to go through just to give you a sense of what we might be able to do with this kind of information, this kind of analysis going forward to the facilitative dialogue next year, the global stock takes after that. And we're very eager to hear from you all today, and certainly in the days and weeks to come, what more, as Jean-François says, that the IEA can do to provide this wealth of data and information analysis that we're sitting on, but make it relevant, make it useful, make it accessible, and to plan ahead to provide the kinds of information that you'll find helpful, again, in the facilitative dialogue, but next year as well. One way to think about this is, are we on track over the near term, medium term, or long term? The Tracking Clean Energy Progress looks to 2025 and looks to that sort of medium time frame of, are we on a trajectory to get to where we need to be in 2025 to meet our long-term goals? We've got a wealth of analysis that looks even more near term than that 2025 time period. What you see on the screen is a pre-2020 IEA strategy. We actually put this out right before the Paris Agreement, but the analysis largely holds on what are those near-term ambition opportunities over the next several years. You see the normal curve, the NDC curve, it's starting to bend down, not quite there. But what we put together was a bridge scenario. So it was, what can we do immediately over this next few year period of time to actually get us on a trajectory that gives us a fighting chance to get to that 2 degree, let alone well trajectory. And what we did was analyze what are the particular policy areas that allow for that near-term opportunity. So you see the 5 listed there. These are global numbers in that they cover where the opportunities are on a cost-effective basis around the world. Energy efficiency, you see, is the big headline, if you will, in that context, but renewables and some of the other policy applications are also significant in terms of potential impact. You see things like methane emission reductions in the oil and gas sector that a lot of people don't appreciate the huge amounts and huge volumes of emission reduction potential there are in that way. So one thing we could do is try to bring some of this more near-term analysis, again, if it's helpful to you all in your discussions, both in the group setting, but also I think even more importantly, maybe your discussions within your own governments, with your energy ministry colleagues, with your other colleagues as well. We can also take this data and move it from a global data about are we collectively on track to look more regionally or more country specific. This is that same analysis, but it's looking at the different wedges of where you see potential around different regions of the world. So if you look in China, for instance, China has a huge efficiency opportunity. They've made great strides on efficiency, but huge efficiency opportunity even more. Russia, no surprise, would have huge opportunities in reducing methane emissions from their oil and gas sector. And so we're thinking about building up the analytical capabilities even more to do more granular work like this. So not only regional based, but we certainly do this in the country context as well. Again, to provide the kind of actionable information, actionable analysis that will hopefully outline future ambition opportunities near term, but longer term as well for countries around the world. We do not only focus in the near term, but we focus in the long term, 2050, mid-century strategies that a number of countries are undertaking. Again, this slide shows some of our scenarios, some of our analysis to the 2050 time period. And you see on the bar graph on the right side that not every country, not every region will look the same. Some will have more efficiency, some will have more renewables. There are different contexts, different assets, different resources in those particular countries. So there's not a one size fits all. And again, that's where our analysis, our efforts can be helpful going forward. It's also useful, of course, to track the money piece of it. Not only the technological piece, the deployment piece, but where are energy companies, where are other companies actually spending their money right now? Put your money where your mouth is kind of analysis. And we've got an investment report for the first time put out last year. The second version of that is coming out, I think, in just a few weeks from now. And that, again, tracks the money flows around the world. You see the various sectors in which a lot of that's taking place. Jean-François mentioned some of the success in the renewable side. Much of the electricity generation investment is actually occurring in the renewable side. Again, a good news story, but certainly it's a huge investment space, and not all of that is in the clean energy space, is in technologies and areas that are going to get us to the 2 degree trajectory, let alone the well below 2 degree trajectory. We can also look not only at individual technologies, but how they add up. As Jean-François said, it's supply, it's demand, but it's the integration piece and how all these pieces look together. So here's one looking at the aggregate perspective on the power capacity needs going forward. Again, you see the line there showing some progress in the near term, certainly a flattening off, but you look at that steep curve needed in terms of our analysis to get us on the right track. The other last thing to say, just as a general matter, and this is where we mostly work with energy ministries, it's important to just emphasize you've got energy sector actions, greenhouse gas targets, certainly energy sector actions because of the fact that it's 2/3 of GHG emissions are critical for achieving greenhouse gas targets. The thing that I know I've certainly come to appreciate working both in the climate and energy space is energy sector decisions are, of course, not solely determined by GHG targets and GHG policies and GHG political objectives. There are lots of other reasons countries make decisions about how to invest and how to deploy technologies: cost effectiveness, air quality, as Jean-François mentioned, energy security, energy access, all sorts of kinds of things. And what IEA can bring to the table is tracking the energy system part of the equation as we track the GHG levels as well, so that we can think about this energy and GHG system as a whole. So again, looking beyond this point in time, we certainly encourage everyone to play around on the website. The new interactive web feature, which just went live today, is a great resource with all sorts of both in-depth analysis, but also very accessible analysis at the IEA website. But as we think ahead, what we can do more to help you all in the room today, collectively, individually, what can we do better? What can we do to provide timely information throughout this year into 2018 for the facilitative dialogue, the 2023 global stock take? How can we identify short-term opportunities, like the analysis that I showed with the pie chart? Can we be more granular with regional and country-specific information? What form would that be most useful to you all as a critical part of decision-making within particular countries and company perspectives? And again, how can we highlight and track the investment piece on innovation, the research and development piece as well for longer term, especially longer term low carbon systems? And more generally, what can we do to help? We've got this wealth of talent. We've got terrific analysts like Jean-François and his whole team. Peter up here coordinated the tracking clean energy progress and did a phenomenal job this year. We've got terrifically smart people from all over the world sitting on a wealth of data. What can we do to provide that information to you all in the most user-friendly and the most usable form possible? So again, we're very eager to hear your thoughts, perspectives, and guidance so that we can help you do your jobs even better. So with that, and before calling our panelists up here for their presentations, let me just pause now and see if there are any questions, comments, criticisms, whatever form of comment you'd like to make. And please just raise your hand, and then when you ask a question, just identify yourself for purposes of other folks in the audience. Yeah, right here in front.
Jouni Keronen, Climate Leadership Council. So actually, Philippe Benoit visited us about a year ago, and we discussed the solar predictions, which were not kind of so accurate. It was because the solar is penetrating so many different ways. So is there some like improved models to forecast solar penetration better than in the past? But otherwise, it's great work. This is not criticism. You are doing super good work.
Thanks. While we're seeing if there are other questions, Jean-François, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can answer that right now. You have to make a difference between what I'm showing here, which are scenarios, and what would be projections. So the idea of the analysis that we do is to try to see how each of these technologies can actually best fit one another in a cost optimal way, how they can actually provide the most benefit and so forth. So while as you roll out more solar, the costs come down, sometimes what we're saying is there could be other opportunities than solar that would provide more added value to the overall system as a whole. So yes, the solar technologies are taking more terrain, but at the same time, they're creating challenges that could have been addressed through other ways. So what we're trying to show those scenarios are not, this is what will happen, this is what we should be aiming to. Now, it's great that actually solar is making more progress, because it's actually taken the room of others that have not had the type of supports. But you have to be very careful in terms of looking at our scenarios as projections. We're not trying to say what will happen. We're trying to give information as to what would be the most cost effective, the best way to ensure we meet our carbon objectives without throwing away the energy security baby with the bathwater and the affordability of the system as well, and the energy access. So the scenario that we try to put forward are those that actually help meet the most energy policy objectives as we can.
Yeah, please.
I also have a background. I was 24 years in Fortum with 6 different, I've been working with R&D like half of my life. So this solar is kind of tricky thing to forecast. Because typically, even my colleagues are comparing that to the other production, and then you end up certain kind of conclusions. But then solar is coming everywhere, small customers, medium customers, industry, and I thought that may be very difficult to forecast.
So I won't go into a very technical discussion here, but in 2014, we did publish kind of our learning curves types of aspects and so forth. And what you see is actually solar is much more like a digital technology than it is a traditional energy technology. But we have means to approve with this. It's really, there's also a link between how much actually policy support is putting forward and how the costs go down. So it's very complex systems.
Just one other comment. As Jean-François was going through the green and orange and red perspective, certain things were green. Solar was one of the ones that were green, on track in a 2-degree world. The challenge there is on track if everything else were green too. So if CCS were green, if all the other pieces were green, then solar's doing its part, if you will, according to our scenarios in terms of what's cost effective, et cetera, et cetera. We're not on track. It's only 3 of the 20, whatever it is, that's on track. That means if some things are never going to be green, solar, wind, storage, EVs need to do even more. They need to be even more supercharged in order to basically pick up the slack that others. And so while there's some good news in some of the numbers we're seeing, certainly the plateauing of GHG emissions, that doesn't underscore the challenge and the fact that we're not fundamentally on track, certainly for a 2-degree world, let alone a well below 2-degree world.
The Aussie in the crowd, didn't you? Mark Bonner from the Global CCS Institute. First of all, I think this is fantastic. The interface is user-friendly, it's intuitive, and I think we'll cut to the chase on many of the efforts that organisations like mine are promoting. Jean-François, you said that carbon capture and storage in forums like this need to be considered as a climate mitigation, and there's lost opportunities if it's not emphasised. Do you feel the CEM, the Clean Energy Ministerial, shares the same concern? And in which case, do you think there's an efficient interface between the Clean Energy Ministerial and the UNFCCC, or the conversation that we're having here?
Well, I can say, after having sat in many discussions around the Clean Energy Ministerial, there's definitely an interface between the SEM and the UNFCCC, and the fact that most of the discussions around the SEM are how can we actually fast track the clean energy transition, how can we look at these technologies to achieve our NDCs and even beyond, how are we doing? This major output of the IEA analysis actually was born as an input into the Clean Energy Ministerial discussions. So we have been providing this information. The SEM ministers have been basing a lot of their discussions in terms of what we're bringing in that respect. On CCS specifically, the Clean Energy Ministerial used to have a specific initiative on CCS. They have now been discussing with the CSLF, which is another forum, in terms of which area should be focusing on what. There are still values of looking at CCS in a much broader forum like this, the Clean Energy Ministerial. It will be up to them to decide how they want to do this, but the IEA is organizing on the side of the Clean Energy Ministerial a specific CCS event with high-level representation to be able to bring that to the forefront so that the SEM can still remember that CCS is part of the suite of solutions that make sense.
Just 2 other quick things. For those who aren't intimately familiar with the SEM, or the Clean Energy Ministerial, it's a group of roughly 23 or so major countries of the world developing energy ministers getting together each year, but then a lot of work and a variety of different initiatives. As Jean-François mentioned, CCS used to be an initiative in the SEM. There's hope, including by the IEA, that it will be another initiative again, and that's hence the reason for this high-level minister-level event that Fatih Birol, our head, will certainly participate, and we're trying to help organize as well. The other thing with CCS, or a lot of these other technologies, is if you're not going to do CCS, you need to do even more of other kinds of things. And so a lot of what our analysis shows is it's going to be very difficult to get to this level of deep reduction, the energy transitions that fundamentally will change energy systems throughout the world. And so we really need to try to put our eggs in a lot of different baskets and really try to develop a lot of these technologies, because the sheer magnitude of the problem is so difficult and so challenging. So that's the approach we take is how can we use all of these levers? And frankly, we're going to need all of these levers, or we're going to need some lever to do even more than it might otherwise be feasible to do. So it's a daunting challenge.
I think one of the key role that we see ourselves doing is to bring the realities of the energy world to the climate negotiations. And this is where, you know, the energy ministers are not always very well involved into these climate negotiations. We're just trying to make sure that they basically, our ministers have mandated us to actually look into how we can ensure that their views are actually well represented here and that they have a good understanding of what is happening here. So we're really trying to play that kind of translator role.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Kish Matsuda, representing the global chemical industry. One small question is if we could get, you could share the implicit cost data from your analysis of the scenarios. I mean, this kind of conversation was frequently, you know, communicated with your team, but so far it's a little bit difficult for us to really understand what's the cost implication of various, you know, approaches like energy efficiency,
Yes.
various efficiencies, methodologies, and so forth.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And this is one of the things that we are definitely trying to do, and that's why the web portal, we're putting a lot more emphasis onto this. When we release in 2 weeks from now, Energy Technology Perspectives, as we release the publication, all the data, the underlying data and the analysis is available online for those who are subscribers. So basically, we are trying to make that information as available as possible to partners. So we are eager to also get feedback in terms of some of the assumptions. We work very close with the chemical industry, as you know, but with also many other stakeholders to make sure that our views are based on a very strong understanding of real life issues. We have the IEA have an energy business council where we have large communications with all the energy business stakeholders and have them discuss with our ministers around the table as well, so that we try to bring the private and the public side together to have a common understanding. And so it's very important for us to make that information as available and get your views from the stakeholders. So this is not done in an ivory tower approach.
So why don't we take this opportunity to switch over to the panel portion. Jean-François will come back up here if there are any further questions after our two panelists speak and present, to answer any more questions. And again, be thinking of what more we can do from the IEA side. We really are eager to hear your advice on what we can do to be helpful, in particular with the task at hand that folks in the room are facing. So with that, I'll call each of our two panelists up one at a time. They'll give their presentations, and then they'll stay up here to answer questions as well. Let me start with Ada Surma, who's the Director General with the Global Environmental Partnership Office of METI in Japan, where he oversees climate change policy for METI. So with that, come on up, and thanks again for participating.
Thank you very much for introducing me. And thank you very much giving me a time for my presentation. I'm going to present the Japan's new action regarding to the emission reduction, not only domestically, but also globally. So the title is Joint Innovation Projects. And then joint means we'd like to proceed the emission reduction project with the partner countries, and which typically are developing countries. So next page, please. Oh no, I have to click. Wait a minute. Right. Scroll down. So, yes. So the circle, and then left-hand side shows the participation of the countries in the Kyoto Protocol. So there's a huge percentage of the non-participation. And then now the right-hand side, everybody participated. And then in the world, Japan's emission is only 3%. Next slide, if we go to, why the, yes, yeah. Okay. Okay, I omit one slide, but Japan is only 3% in the world emission, and then we are trying to be a country of technology. We are still continuing R&D, and then we contribute a mission innovation project. But Japan's population, unfortunately, not growing. So the companies, even Japanese companies tends to see an overseas market to apply their technology. And if we try to emission reduction only in Japan, there is a limit because the market is not expected to grow significantly. So naturally, to contribute to Paris Agreement, its implementation, we have to look overseas emission reduction project. That is the main concept. And then this is one example. Last March, King of Saudi Arabia came to Japan and then met our Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And then there's a very comprehensive agreement document. But within that, we put a very interesting trial project. So Saudi Arabia and Japan, we are trading so much oil daily, monthly, yearly. And then if we can decarbonize this energy trade, it can change something. And then the real project we are aiming to is to carry out a CCS project in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia also already has one commercial CCS project, but not second. And then Japan now have one demonstrational CCS project in northern island of Japan called Hokkaido. And then I'm in charge of this CCS project as well. And then honestly, when I see my CCS project in Japan, the cost is not cheap, not low, because Japan is a country of earthquake. So our underground reservoir is not very big. And then for the CCS, it's technical explanation, but we have to have a very good cap rock to contain the CO2. But if that cap rock has some seismic activity, we can't use that. So our first project has a cost of $600 million US. But with that infrastructure, we can't put so much CO2 underground. So it kills the economy of the size. Saudi Arabia, of course, there are so huge potential of the CCS. They have a reservoir. And on top of that, they can go for the enhanced oil recovery. So put CO2 underground, and then using that pressure, they can recover the oil extraction. So EOR can help the economy of the CCS. In Japan, we cannot do that because we are not oil and gas producing countries. So if we can carry out some CCS project in Saudi Arabia, or not only Saudi Arabia, maybe our partner can be United Arab Emirates, Japan can contribute the significant amount of the CO2 emission reduction, not in Japan, but in Saudi Arabia. And then if some oil exporting countries can claim that their oil export is already offset by the some emission reduction project, such as CCS, that is very beneficial for Japan as well. And if Saudi Arabia can go for the export of the hydrogen, I know it's a kind of future technology, but when producing hydrogen, it emits a CO2. And if we capture that CO2 and then put it underground, and then Japan imports that hydrogen, hydrogen does not emit the CO2, any CO2 on the demand side. So that can perfectly reduce Japan's emission reduction. But our principal goal is not talking about emission reduction in Japan or Saudi Arabia. Our principal aim is jointly by using some Japan's advantage technology and Saudi Arabia's advantage reservoir knowledge, and then achieve the significant emission reduction no matter where in the world. That is our concept. Yes. The picture shows a very small picture, unfortunately, but it shows Japan's first CCS demonstration project. And then actually the many visitors from overseas are coming to see this significant project. And then next slide. I think I explained that. Yes. And then this is also maybe a strategic for Japanese government as well, because our domestic market is not growing so fast, but overseas market growing. So doing emission reduction overseas also means expand our Japanese companies' business opportunity in the world. Actually, a technology to separate CO2 from coal-fired combustion gas. One Japanese company has a good share in this market. So by carrying out that kind of project, we can help the expansion of some Japanese company business. And then if we go to the right hand, the graph circle, Saudi Arabia is exporting the oil to the worldwide, and then Japan has a share of the 15%. But if we can achieve the low carbonized oil export or hydrogen export, it can contribute not only for Japan, but also for the world. Yes, and then the last slide is now in Japan domestically, we are talking about why not we can carbon neutralize our emission. If we see Japan's emission, the corner, we have some limit to reduce emission domestically. With CCS, we do not have so much reservoir. And then we do some credit trade mechanism. But there is, for that, there is also a limitation, because now every country has its own NDC. So they are getting a little bit reluctant to sell the credit to Japan. So we are trying to find a third way to contribute the Paris Agreement. And then that is, if we try to reduce emission reduction in the world using our technology, we can best contribute, and then we can best cooperate with that is the Japan's new, I think, a trial action regarding the Paris Agreement implementation. And then this idea comes from our discussion realize emission reduction in practice. And then the example was a CCS. But for the kind of demand response system or a solar panel or the electric vehicle or a PHV, the same principle can apply. So the all innovation technology, we have to look at the collaboration with the partner countries. That is our new concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's call our second and final panelist, and then we'll open it up to questions from any of us up here. Sven Soyland is the senior advisor and specializes in the nexus between energy and climate, project leader for the Nordic platform, Nordic Green Growth Program, and also involved in the Nordic flagship project. So Sven, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation to come here. And let's see, where do I just click there? Okay. So it's an honor and pleasure to be here. And I'd like to give my presentation in 3 parts. First of all, I'd like to just give a brief introduction to what kind of organization we are. We are a Nordic organization that fund energy research. We don't do energy research ourselves, but we do analysis and we organize studies. And one of the studies we have done together with IEA is the Nordic Energy Technology Perspectives, which is a sister publication or a sister project of ETP. So basically, it delves much more in detail in the Nordic countries. And given that the Nordic countries have had a much more ambitious climate target, it actually gives a sort of glimpse into what kind of targets the Paris Agreement will dictate. They're not analog, but it's more in direction of what the NTP is. Do provide policy advice to on the Nordic countries and our ministries, and we promote RD as well. So this is the publication that we produced last year together with IEA, Nordic Energy Technology Perspectives. It came up with 3 strategic actions, which should be quite obvious to most people. It's about incentivize and plan for more distributed, interconnected, and flexible energy systems. We've done quite well in the Nordic countries on that. I'll come back to that. But we have to do even better in order to meet our Nordic targets. Secondly, we should use the momentum that we see in cities and municipalities when it comes to transport and buildings. They are much ahead of our national efforts. Cities actually put up targets that are well within reach of meeting some of the climate targets that countries fail to meet. Thirdly, we need a wrap up of the decarbonization of long distance transport and the industry sector. And this is probably the biggest and the most challenging part for the world and also for the Nordic countries. Okay, so I'm going to give you some rosy pictures from the Nordic situation. This is the global carbon intensity of electricity production. It's quite high, 500 grams per gram CO2 per kilowatts. This is how we have to move forward on a global scale in order to reach the targets that we had ahead of Paris. This is actually where the Nordic countries are already. So we have been blessed with a lot of renewable energy, which means that we are quite long ahead of the curve. But it's not only a rosy story, because 70% of our emissions are related to transport and industry. We are very energy intensive industries. And we also have electricity or heat that takes 30% of our emissions. So this is what we came out of the NETP in terms of trajectories for how our emissions should change. And again, transport is really a big challenge for us, as well as industries. So we have to do quite a lot of efforts in order to improve that. So to some of the what I would call disruptive events that has been highlighted in the presentation earlier. EVs, we have the highest EV ratio per capita, and as you saw from the earlier slides, 25% of all cars in Norway now, new cars, are either plug-in hybrids or electric vehicles. And that's, if somebody had suggested that a few years back, I think nobody would have believed it. But it doesn't come by itself. And that's one point that I would like to raise in my comments to the report as such. A broad suite of policies in place. It's also a VAT that can be taken away. In many countries, you don't have a high VAT on cars, so it's much more painful to actually incentivize EV ownership. So, and then, of course, you have free parking, free use of bus lanes. All the cars where the ambulance is standing are electric vehicles. So we had to do some change in our policies. We couldn't leave the ambulances stalling in the line over there. We have free charging. So there's a whole suite of incentives that made this possible. It doesn't come by itself. I'd also like to go to Denmark and show their increased potential of percentage of wind. They had a slight dip last year because of extraordinary lower amounts of wind, but the trend is quite clear. And important takeaway lesson here is basically that energy modelists, model people wouldn't imagine that you could have so much renewable energy, flexible energy in an energy system. So it's actually possible to ramp up without jeopardizing energy security, and this is the living proof of it. And this is how we manage, and that is by having export and import between Denmark and Norway at a very high level and very quickly responding to changes. So Norway is the backup. When it's not blowing in Denmark, we can use the hydro that is stored in magazines. So there are other examples as well. You look at Germany that just experienced 85% of renewables in their mix recently. You saw the first period ever of 24 hours without any coal power fed into the grid in UK. So these are disruptive events that it's very difficult to foresee in a outlook or even to prognose. And this is probably one of the challenges for IEA when they release their World Energy Outlooks, that disruptions, you cannot plan for them and you cannot foresee the tremendous force and the speed of them. So how to measure? This report that we're discussing today has two sets of measures. The short-term measures, which basically are the arrows going up, down, or straight forward, or the traffic lights. But we have to be careful because, say for instance, a slowdown in investment in renewables, if prices are dramatically lowered, then a slowdown in investment doesn't really mean a slowdown in installed capacity. So we have to be very careful with this. And then we also have to be very much more aware of the frameworks that has enabled these changes. So specifically on the report, I must admit immediately, I've only read the executive summary, so there might be more details in the full report. But I think that you've brushed a bit easy on industrial CCS because it is incredibly important. And also there are a few promising projects. There are 3 industrial CCS projects in Norway now, one on cement, one on agriculture, and one on this plant that I'm pictured here, which is a waste sorting and waste to energy plant outside of Oslo, which are going to become CCS, equipped with the CCS capture unit quite soon. So there are actually things happening, and these are very important because there's no other option than CCS for industry. The coal power plants, we can substitute with other source of energy, but production of steel, cement, aluminium, and also waste handling is something that is such an essential part of our fabric of life. We have to cope with it one way or the other. So then back to another recent event that we cannot blame IEA for not foreseeing. Vattenfall had Kriegers Flak, record low prices. This is offshore wind. And then suddenly we got Germany, Dong Energy with another record. They're actually now putting in a bid without any subsidy whatsoever on offshore wind. And this is a disruptive event that will most likely and should change the directions of some of the projections in the scenario of IEA. And I think they're quite happy to be beaten on this. Then I'd like to point out aviation as well, because that is a major challenge that we really have difficulty in coping with. Getting the alternative fuels will be really challenging. It'll be difficult to find sustainable fuels. It will be difficult to find at a reasonable price. Although my recent communication with some Nordic stakeholders is that they're actually willing to pay a premium. There might actually be a market failure in delivering sustainable biofuels, aviation fuel, for the time being. But anyway, this picture is from the aviation industry themselves. It shows a big challenge. And let me just bring up one more poster. Yes, this one on transport. This is again from Nordic energy technology perspectives, and it just highlights the big challenge that we have ahead of us. We expect more passenger kilometers, more goods to be transported, but both are going to have a steep reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is perhaps, for the Nordics at least, the biggest challenge we have. Thank you for the attention.
Well, thank you to all our panelists. We do have some time for some questions. So any questions or comments that anybody in the audience would like to ask? As you're thinking of some, maybe put everybody on the spot, and I'll start with Jean-François since he's a colleague of mine. Very quickly, would be curious to get our panelists' perspective on what technology or area are you most excited about? Meeting the Paris objective of well below 2 is a daunting challenge. We've talked about that. I think every panel touches on that. What area are you most enthusiastic or excited about right now that you really see some upside that maybe not everybody's tracking with? And then also, what's the area that if you wake up at night with a nightmare and you're like, why aren't more people focused in this area? Why are we collectively not up to the challenge? So what's the highest performing area and what's the lowest performing area, if you will? So if you look at the stop chart, which is the greenest of the green that people aren't appreciating, and then what is the one area that's the most challenge that people just aren't focused on? Jean-François?
Yeah, and I guess I'm gonna cheat a little bit on your question, because for the highest performing, rather than choosing that one that's on the green side, to me, one of the things that is starting to emerge that is extremely exciting I mentioned that one of the key aspects in the systems integrations aspect, and I think that the increasing role that information communication technologies are playing and the new business models that are getting enacted by the vast amount of information, digital information that is out there, is probably one of the most exciting areas to consider. I think we are finally getting into an area where the idea of matching supply and demand on a live basis is at our fingertips. We're starting to think about the right business models to enable that, whether it's on the transport sector, whether it's in the power sector, demand response aspects, and so forth. I think this is probably one of the areas that has the most promises of, as Sven mentioned, basically taking all us modelers, unaware and really changing the theme of the game. As you said, I'm actually very happy when somebody surprises me in the right way. I think in the other one, though, I think one of the areas, and Sven alluded to that, one of the areas I'm the most concerned about is the role of energy-intensive industries. I think there are huge opportunities in those energy industries, in those industrial areas like iron and steel, like cement, like chemicals, like pulp and paper, but that the policymakers have not gathered enough resources or time to actually sit with these proponents and really have a very thorough and open dialogue. I think we cannot achieve a cost-effective transition without taking these industrial concerns into consideration. I think there are huge economic impacts of not having that dialogue, and to me, this is where there should be the most political attention, is having this dialogue. Green growth is an opportunity, but it needs to be managed and it needs to be thought of in advance.
Thanks, JF. Our other panelists, Sven?
Just to bring up one more thing that I think is somewhat promising, and that is the recent development in Denmark where they managed to power down coal-fired power plants, which could give them a more meaningful part of their future energy mix, as instead of being the old clunkers that just keep on going at 80 or 90% capacity all the time. But what I'm missing, and what I think is the big thing for us to look at in the future, is to be much more serious about sharing enabling frameworks and learning from each other's successes, because countries are quite insular when it comes to trying to learn from what have worked in one country to another. And that's also one thing I would like to challenge IEA on, is basically to be on pointing out what kind of frameworks have actually worked, instead of having sort of general advice on creating enabling frameworks, because there are certain things that work and certain things that don't work. When it comes to sort of, well, you pointed out it is industry that is really and transport that is really big challenging. The thing that you pointed out in your slides but you didn't mention is energy efficiency, which could have huge benefits in terms of health impact as well.
Oh, thanks.
I'd like to focus on the geological potential when applying the technology. So I think Japan is a very typical case. We introduced the feed-in tariff system, and then we kickstart the introduction with the solar panel. But it's surprising. I'm living the outer side of Tokyo. It takes me 1 hour and a half to commute. And then my neighbors, some companies start cutting down trees to put the solar panel, or it's happening. Or some farmers convert their rice field to lay out the solar panels. Also, in case of wind, Japan or some monsoon area in the world has a typhoon every year, and then which makes it very difficult. To the for example, for the wind in Denmark, they have a kind of ideal geological potential. So I think the penetration of the low carbon technology can vary significantly depending on the location. Under the Kyoto Protocol, the countries were focusing on the domestic action mainly. But if we want to maximize the low carbon progress, we have to more concentrate on the realizing the geological potential everywhere in the world. Yes.
No, thanks for that. I think we've got time. If anybody has a question, looks like let's go in the back first and then come up here. We can throw the box around. Right there first, Peter, and then Sarah, if you want to we'll go there first and then we'll go in the fifth row there. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'm Kevin from the Dutch government. I have a question relating to the presentation of the gentleman from the Japanese ministry. The panel sees a risk in double counting the CO2 reductions of either country in a kind of partnering scheme between Saudi Arabia and Japan.
Thanks. Why don't we've got a few people with their hands up. Let's just take all of these questions and then come through the panel. Why don't we go there next and then to the gentleman back there. Actually, let's just go there first and then we've got there and there. All right, good. Right there, sir. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so at first you asked wishes that what you can trace more. So I think the CCU will be a big thing in the future. So if CCS is like 10% of the emission reductions or opportunity by 2050, CCU may be much, much bigger. And then we have these wandering carbon atoms. The steel industry make the carbon from the ground, and then it, instead of going as a flue gas to the sky, it will be converted to the raw material of chemical industry, and then also it could be a fuel, and then the forests are taking it back. So then the other question relating to forest, because we have now a lot of discussions of this biomass. Some opinions are that we should not touch it, let it grow and act as a carbon sink. And we know that like after 40 years, it will die out, the ability to sink more. So that could be also another thing, what could be more clarified. Last one is what I'm kind of dreaming is the consumer activation. Because right now I'm living in Finland, there's so many things what consumers actually can do, and it's surprisingly small, kind of slow the penetration. So I think that what are the ways how we can speed up the penetration of these new solutions that will be also increasing the momentum.
Thanks. No, excellent questions. Over here.
Yes. Hi, I'm Kai Salem at Brown University's Climate and Development Lab in the United States, and I study grid modernization policy in transitioning power sectors. I'm wondering, especially for Mr. Soiland, what kind of, if you've had to have like a policy process or a concerted effort to redo grid infrastructure to accommodate high levels of renewables?
No, thanks. Excellent question. We've got the gentleman right there, Peter.
Thank you very much. Jorima from the 21st Century the Policy Institute of Japan. I have a question to Norwegian presenter, Mr. Soiland. Sorry. You made a very much interesting slide about the relation between the Danish wind export and backup Norwegian hydro. So to what extent the larger penetration of renewables in one country is closely related to its interconnection with neighboring countries? For example, in the case of Germany, Germany is connected with neighboring countries such as Dutch or Poland or France or others. So, and to what extent Germany's 85% achievement of, say, power generation from renewables is connected with neighboring countries? So that is my question.
No, excellent questions. Does anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, we've got one right in the middle there. Sarah, do you?
Jose, King's College London. The question is very straightforward. How to help establishing best practices in a world of technological diversity. The context is a big offshore wind farm. There's a scale in there. Technology goes forward and all farms will improve. Other projects like one I read a while ago, Germany is turning an old coal mine into a hydro pumped facility. That's very specific. And all around the world there are projects. So how to help those going forward?
Terrific. Well, thanks for all the questions. Why don't we just go right through the panelists this way and certainly answer any that were directed to you. We'll hold you accountable if you duck any questions, but answer any other ones as well if you've got something relevant. Sven, why don't we start with you?
I got two, so I'll try to at least answer those and then maybe chip in afterwards. On grid development, first of all, I think it has to be very situation specific. And there is indeed a challenge when you have a number of people that are getting a looser connection to the grid. Because the grids, say, for instance, in Europe, they are old and they are in disrepair, are in bad shape, really. And the same goes for parts of US as well. So who's going to carry the cost if a lot of people want to disconnect? If we look to Spain, what they did there was basically put a levy on even those that did disconnect. And it's a matter of those that remain hooked up to the grid as well. So there's a social dimension to it. But to be more specific on improving grids, I think if you look to Africa, it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be off grid or on grid. You might be able to prepare an off-grid system that at a later stage could become connected to a grid. So they're not necessarily in opposition. But I'm sure whether maybe we can take offline more detailed what your question was, but because I can't really grasp the full depth of your question. When it comes to Germany, well, the 85% was actually a fluke incident. I should be honest and tell you, because it was high radiation, low temperatures, and it was the 1st of May, so the energy need was really low. Germany has really a big problem because they have very bad interconnectors between the south and the north. Germany as a whole are far from actually having a adequate infrastructure for having energy flexibility to the interconnectors between Norway and Denmark that are responsive and that operate with two variables that are wind and precipitation that are quite predictable, which means that they can balance and plan ahead for peaks. So it all has to depend. But underlying all this in the Nordic situation with a integrated market is a high degree of trust. About 100 years to build. So it doesn't happen in the spur of a moment. For instance, if you want to build a similar type of interconnectors between countries in other regions, you would have to think very hard about this, the geopolitical aspects of it. Thank you.
No, thanks, Sven. JF?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I'll take the questions in reverse order because I think they actually have a logic behind them. I'll start with the first one, which I think is probably for us the most important one. How do you actually get best practices uptaken by as many people as possible? That's really what we're here for. That's what the IEA is trying to do. We have our 29 member countries, but as Dave mentioned earlier on, we also realize that the energy world is much larger than our 29 member countries. So we've embarked into this modernization process where we're really opening the doors to all countries. We now have 5 association countries, which are countries that have a specific relationship with the IEA. We have multiple partner countries. We have set up, when the IEA was created 40 years ago, we created what we call an energy technology network that brings together about 6,000 scientists from 52 different countries, many different organizations, public, private sector, academia, everyone together to basically do exactly that. Get together, think, what are the issues? What do we know about how to solve them? What do we don't know about solving them? And so what do we need to research to be able to find out what to solve them? This is really kind of the bread and butter of what we try to do. And so part of the studies that we do are to take some of those best practices and share them. Part of them are to provide added input into those discussions. And a lot of what we do is convene people together. We've created a process that we call the Technology Roadmap Program that looks at specific areas bring stakeholders from the regulators, from the finance people, from the technology provider, from the utilizers, all in a room discussing what is a vision we could achieve, how do we achieve this, what are the barriers, who could do what, and then we write that up into a specific roadmap that can then be shared with an understanding that this is a consensus approach by multiple stakeholders. So truly the collaboration is at the root aspect. Examples to follow up on. So we've done quite a bit of work in terms of variable renewables integration. I would say that when you're thinking about the system, you need the key theme is flexibility. And we've done quite a bit of work in terms of identifying opportunities for 4 types of flexibility. Flexible power generation, and we're still doing quite a lot of work on that. What is the role of the existing power generation infrastructure, and can we turn it into a flexible aspect in a cost-effective way? We've published a technology roadmap on storage. We're seeing, lots of good things happening. Transmissions. We talked about interconnectors. We have many studies into this, and demand response. How can smart grids? How can more ICT help enable customers to manage their energy in a more efficient way, but also in a more systems-friendly way? And we're actually working on a report right now on digitalization that will address a lot of these issues. So we're continuously asking these questions, discussing amongst our member countries, our partner countries, all our networks in terms of getting the best practices and trying to put that out. There was a very interesting question about what is the role of the customer. Basically, how do we get the customer to actually be part? Well, again, by having the right type of information, the right type of market signals, but also the right type of technology, such as ICTs, that's where you'll see behavior starting to change and much. And I think one of the 2 last questions are very important. The role of biomass in a carbon-constrained world. I said in 2 weeks from now, we'll be releasing our 2017 edition of Energy Technology Perspectives that looks at how far we can go below 2 degrees. One of the key, driver of how far you can go is how much sustainable biomass you can actually rely on. At a certain point, there are some of the renaming emissions that cannot be mitigated, so you need to start looking at creating negative emissions to offset those. Many of those come from the biomass section. So basically being able to identify sustainable biomass sources to enact negative emissions through the use of CCS becomes critical. And then finally on the carbon utilization question, there are opportunities for carbon utilization that make the deployment and demonstration of carbon capture and transportation technologies more cost effective. However, we have to be careful because our own views, when we look at the numbers, is that there isn't even 10% of the overall carbon that needs to be captured that can actually be turned into a usable source. Storage remains the main mechanism to actually take away carbon emissions, and we need to invest in better storage characterization and transport infrastructure. Thank you.
So I take up the question of the double counting. And then unfortunately, although Japan makes emission reduction contribution in the world, that reduction never will be counted in achieving Japan's numerical target. We have to avoid a double count, we have to separate clearly. But there's still reason to do that for Japan, because we are the technology-based countries, and then we have to keep innovation. We don't have a resource, we don't have energy. So the technology-based countries. So that new concept is mainly for the Japan's sustainable economic growth, and as well as it can contribute global emission reduction. That is our new concept.
No, thanks for that. I think we're out of time, even a little bit over time. Just a few concluding thoughts. One, please go to the website. It should be a user-friendly, interactive, tracking clean energy progress like we've never done it before. Let us know what you think. Let us know what we can improve it. By way of coming attractions, we have Jean-François' ETP report that he referenced, this really serious look at how low can we go using existing technologies in a cost-effective kind of manner. Our investment report is coming out soon. Jean-François also mentioned our digitalization report. For the first time ever, IEA is going to do a comprehensive digitalization report looking at digitalization's impact in the energy space and, of course, in the low carbon part of that as well. That'll be coming out in October also. And let us know what more we can do to help you, whether you're negotiators working climate issues within a government, whether you're companies, whether you're organizations. Are there some of these analytical tools we can improve upon that we can, again, provide the kind of actionable, useful information that can be taken forward? So please let us know on an ongoing basis what the IEA can certainly do to be helpful. And then let's just conclude with one final thanks, not only for our panel, but also for Peter Janoska, who's standing up over there, who spent, I don't know how many hours total helping to shepherd and coordinate the TCEP, the Tracking Clean Energy Progress Report. Peter, thank you for all your excellent work over many, many months on this project. Thanks also to Sarah Morif from the IEA, who's been helpful with this event and a lot of other things on our climate change team. And thanks for our three panelists up here. Very much appreciate your time and talent for this. And thank you all for coming here today.